It's the first football at 4 leading into a regular season game. Andrew DiCecco, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now. They'll match your first deposit up to $250. Go to PlaySugarHouse.com. Win real money with their sportsbook and casino games from the comfort of your home. Must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Mike Gill, Hunter Brody. 97.3 ESPN.com's Andrew DiCecco. It is game week. Eagles and the Washington football team. This Sunday, hear the game live on 97.3 ESPN. The coverage begins at noon. Merrill and Mike have the action starting at 1. A lot to dive into. Let's bring Andrew in. Jim Schwartz, Dave Phipps spoke today. Yesterday, Doug Peterson, Howie Roseman over the weekend. The roster is set. The 53 is out. Let's get into it now with Andrew DiCecco. What's up, bud?
Hey, Mike. What's going on? How are you?
All is good. There's so much to dive into. I got to start and get your reaction to Jason Peters apparently knocking on the door, walking down the hallway, and saying, hey, guys, I'm sliding back to left tackle. The reaction from Doug Peterson, thrilled to death. It kind of sounds like this one, there's a little bit more into this story than what meets the eye.
Yeah, it almost seems like, the player and Jason Peters told Doug Peterson what he was going to do. But we also don't know what goes on behind closed doors. There could have been some sort of an agreement, a gentleman's agreement that the team may have agreed to with Jason Peters. Or he may have just seen his teammate, taking a beating at practice and didn't want to see that happen to Carson Wentz and maybe had a change of heart. And it also could have been that they brought in Cordy Glenn during the week, and that kind of maybe they kind of called his bluff a little bit there, and he was like, you know what, I'll play now. I'll play left tackle now.
All right, so he's the left tackle. Pryor's back at right guard. In the end, are they a better offensive line now than they would have been with Dillard at tackle and Peters at guard?
I think so, Mike. And the reason why I think so is because Jason Peters still played at a high level last season. He hasn't shown any sign of really showing a true regression. And at this stage of his career, even at 38 years old, he's a superior player than Andre Dillard. Andre Dillard was not having a poor camp by any standards, but he certainly wasn't taking the reins and really instilling confidence in the coaching staff that he was going to be that lockdown left tackle, that blindside protector, and not have any growing pains. And certainly with a player like Carson Wentz, you don't really want to gamble when you have Washington coming, when you're going to Washington and you're playing the top defensive line in football. You certainly don't want to throw Dillard out there if you have any kind of reservation. So I do think that they're better there with Peters at left tackle. And Matt Pryor, to me, has shown that he can be a right guard, a competent starting right guard in the NFL in this limited sample size in the playoff game with the Seattle Seahawks. He has a tremendous size and reach, and he gets to the second level very quickly. And, we'll kind of see how that goes. But I definitely do think that he can be a competent starter at right guard. So I do think that they're ultimately stronger as it stands right now.
Last year, Jason Peters would take some snaps off, and Andre Dillard would be in the mix. And they also had Vaitai to move around in certain spots. This year, is it situational? So if someone on the right side goes down, it's somebody else. If the left tackle goes down, it's Mailata. It seemed like last year you had Vaitai really being the versatile guy and then Dillard at the left tackle spot. But this year it seems like it's almost a free-for-all when it comes to what exact position someone would step in if something happened.
Yeah, and it's kind of scary when you think about it, Hunter. Jeff nailed it when we were doing our positional or our outlooks prior to training camp. He listed Vaitai as being the biggest loss for the Eagles. And when you really look at it, he was the guy that didn't get a lot of praise from the fans. But anytime an offensive lineman went down, he could adequately fill pretty much any role in the offensive line, except with the exception of center. And I think that was kind of taken for granted over the years. Now you don't have a big B. Matt Pryor was supposed to be that guy. He was going to be the right guard now. I still think that even with Peters moving to left tackle, the team would be wise to add another veteran left tackle. I still would add a Cordy Glenn because none of those options that on those depth options are ready to step into an NFL game, in my opinion. They all for a multitude of different reasons. You have Jack Driscoll, who's a rookie. Matt Pryor is not a left tackle. I never understood that move. I know that they wanted to give him the first opportunity, but he's a right tackle if anything. But he's his skill set his skill set is more so for guard. They don't really have any options right now, and I do know that in a pinch, Isaac Seumalo can play tackle. As a rookie, if you remember, he did play that extra tackle in jumbo formation, so he can do that. Obviously, the Eagles don't want him to do that. They don't like to shake up the continuity too much. But yeah, they do have very minimal options there, which is kind of scary.
Andrew, the decision to release Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas. I mean, obviously those guys. Douglas, he was kind of what he was. He was, like a third, fourth corner when he had to get thrown in. He had his moments, but he was not a consistent enough player. Sidney Jones, obviously a huge disappointment. What do you think about the secondary and the fact that they made the decision to release both of those two guys instead of keeping one of them around, the fact that they just cut ties with both of them?
Well, I was a little mildly surprised that they released Rasul Douglas, Mike, because he does offer special teams versatility. He does have size and can play on the outside. For Sidney Jones, he really wasn't a factor all summer. There was never a competition for the second cornerback spot. That was always going to be Avonte Maddox as the second. Sidney Jones was a non-factor. You can't keep giving this guy all these different chances, and he was coming up small. They couldn't trust him to stay healthy for a full slate of games, and he was constantly battling these soft tissue injuries. And for what it's worth, I feel like whatever confidence he did have was left on the field when they played the Vikings last season, and he had some breakdowns in coverage there. I don't know that the light bulb was ever going to come on for Sidney Jones here in Philadelphia, and possibly a change of scenery in Jacksonville could maybe get that talent to play, get him to play the level that his talent suggests. But Sidney Jones doesn't play special teams, so keeping him on as a fourth corner really didn't make a whole lot of sense, knowing that he would have to be active on game day. He's just a backup corner that comes in on sub packages, and I think that the guys that they do have in Kravon LeBlanc and Craig James in reserve, they can play a multitude of different roles on defense, whether it be on the outside, whether it be in the nickel and special teams, which is what you really want when you look to maximize your game day roster.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned James. I guess he's the guy that really beat out both Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas. What about James that they liked? I guess he's the next man up. If Slayer Maddox gets hurt, I would imagine he would be the next guy out on the outside now.
Yeah, Craig James is a guy that I got some good intel on over the past couple of months. I know the team really likes him. They went to great lengths to get him, and credit to the scouting department to find Craig James. I know he was at Southern Illinois, which certainly, you really need to do some digging to find a player in that mold. But my understanding is that he was one of the most impressive guys over the offseason. And if you listen to Howie Roseman and his after they finalized the initial 53, he said that Craig James was a player that he was stalking with the coaching staff and like someone that they wanted to keep putting against better competition to see how he was doing, because he was constantly thriving against the guys he was going against, and they really wanted to see what he would do against top tier guys that they had in speed and size and everything. And he he answered the bell. He can play on the outside. He can play on the inside. He can play on special teams. I think that they have a lot more trust in Craig James. Remember, he didn't start the season with the Eagles, but I think now that he's been there for a full offseason, and I understand that he's a very sharp and intellectual player, he really impressed him in that way. And now he's going to have a big role there as a depth corner.
Do you think that they have enough depth at that position? And if not, could you see a scenario where Jalen Mills moves back?
I don't think that they have enough depth at the position, Hunter, and that was a position that I thought was going to be addressed via the waiver wire, or I was hoping that they were going to do a player-for-player swap or something for someone who was on the outs of the roster, maybe like a Sharrif Miller, but that never materialized. The reason why I don't think that the depth is sufficient enough is because Kravon LeBlanc is primarily a nickel defender. You don't want to put him on the outside very much. He's scrappy and tough and physical, but he doesn't have the size. He doesn't have the speed. So he's kind of limited to playing only the slot. And Craig James is your only guy, and I believe he's like 5'11", and he has his hands full with all four special teams phases. And I think that they really could stand to add a veteran to the position with some length and size.
Yeah, you look at it. Andrew DiCecco is with us, Football at 4 here, looking at the Eagles' roster decisions from over the weekend. That secondary is definitely a different look. And, of course, Malcolm Jenkins is not there in the secondary. And how much is not going to not having Will Parks going to impact them for at least the first couple of weeks of the season?
It's certainly going to impact them a little bit, but if you listen to Inside the Birds, Jeff mentioned, I believe it was about 3 to 4 weeks ago, that Marcus Epps was a sleeper in one of the sleepers of training camp, and he really stood out and impressed the coaching staff. And now he's going to have that role as the third safety and really not necessarily take on all the responsibilities that Will Parks had. But if you listen to Jim Schwartz talk, he really seemed confident that Marcus Epps could step in there and do some different things. He got a lot bigger. He understands the system now. They were really excited when they claimed him off waivers, and now he's going to have a chance to play on defense. I think that he can play adequately enough to kind of tide them over until Will Parks comes back.
You mentioned Sharrif Miller at one point, and were you shocked that he got cut, that they're pretty much admitting another swing and miss in the draft?
I think I was in the minority, Hunter, when I did my 53-man roster, and whenever I spoke about Sharrif Miller, I would always tell folks that, you know what, he hasn't done anything. He played two defensive snaps last season on special teams. He couldn't get on the field. They needed to trade a fourth-round pick to get Jannard Avery to play because they weren't getting anything out of Sharrif Miller. He was virtually invisible this summer. I think if they saw all they needed to see it from Sharrif Miller, I was never really a fan of the pick. He was considered to be more of a project when they took him, but that was also a reach in the fourth round. There was a player from Texas named Charles Omenihu who went around later, who had a better college resume and an NFL body. I believe he was 6'5", 280, and he ended up having 3 sacks for the Texans last year in a rotational role and contributed. So I never really got the Sharrif Miller pick, and it was really refreshing to see the team this year really focus on who's producing versus, who do they invest draft capital on.
Yeah, I know, and they did that with Sidney Jones and Russell Douglas as well, second and third round picks. And Howie Roseman talked about that over the weekend. He said, hey, I talked to a good GM once told me you can't keep guys based on their draft stock, but most teams, the Eagles have done it. Most teams do it. They hold on to these guys because of where they get drafted.
Yeah, and I think they learn from their mistakes because in the past it hasn't worked out. They've kept guys on there. Look no further than someone like Mac Hollins or a Shelton Gibson, that they've made the team over a player like Greg Ward who outperformed them in the preseason and then went on to step in seamlessly on offense and really caught the football well and made some plays down the stretch. And I believe Mac Hollins went about a month and a half without catching a pass. Those guys were clearly not NFL caliber players, and the Eagles prioritized keeping them on the roster over guys that deserve roster spots. And you learn from those mistakes, and you got to see that with, you see a guy like a Casey Toohill who outperformed Sharrif Miller. And Quez Watkins, who they didn't want to lose through waivers. These guys performed well in camp, and they didn't want to risk parting with them and potentially losing some of those guys for players that really didn't justify keeping around.
A couple things I want to get into before. Number one, Kravon LeBlanc, that whole situation. Can you explain to the listeners because Howie's getting a lot of praise for what he was able to do here, and the Eagles started to release players on Friday night. They got a little bit of a head. It might have been Thursday night. I don't remember because I was off those days. But they got a little bit of a head start, and there was a reason why they started to make their cuts a little bit earlier than some of these other teams. So there was a lot of maneuvering by Howie Roseman this weekend.
Yeah. So first, I'll start on the Kravon LeBlanc transaction. The Eagles got lucky that he wasn't. Just to be clear. Kravon's considered a vested veteran, which means you have to accrue 4 years of NFL service, and he has. So he wasn't subject to waivers. He was just outright released. And they could have had an agreement with Kravon that, hey, we're gonna sign you back tomorrow. If another team offers you X amount of dollars, we'll match that, whatever it is. And it turns out other teams were inquiring about Kravon, trying to get him onto their roster, but he ultimately wanted to be in Philadelphia. Now, the reason he was released is because there was a lot of players on the roster that may have been on the cusp or a fringe type of player, but they would have to have cleared waivers. And the Eagles weren't able to put any of the guys on the short-term IR until after 4 o'clock that day. and they had to make room for their running back, Jason Huntley, who they claimed off waivers. So Kravon was the player that they ended up releasing to be able to kind of do some little roster tango there, and it turns out that it worked out, and they were able to get him back. Now, with some of the early roster moves, I thought it was a brilliant move by Howie to release a player like Deontay Burnett early, like he did, to kind of get ahead of the chaotic waiver wire where teams like to be active and make moves there. But he parted with Deontay Burnett early while other teams were making finalizing their roster decisions. So he was kind of able to sneak through waivers and he made it back to the Eagles practice squad. And he's a guy that I could see him being active on Sunday, as the Eagles really don't have a lot of experience in the receiving core for week 1.
Now, some of that was COVID related too, because if they got him released, they were able to get him back in the building quicker, were they not?
Yeah, I mean, they released him, and then I believe it was like 17 and a half hours later, he was back in the building.
Incredible stuff. Your thoughts on Casey Toohill at this point? Making the 53-man with the uphill battle was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it's even more impressive considering that there was no preseason for him to go out there and really prove what he could do. Now, if you remember on the show, one thing that I've always mentioned about Casey Toohill that really struck me was his effort, his tenacity, and his physicality, despite only being, 6'4", 250 pounds, and being outweighed by a lot of every offensive tackle that he goes against by at least 50 pounds. When I saw him at the Shrine Bowl, he would leave practice every day with his number ripped off his jersey, with string hanging off of his shirt. He was just going after it every day and attacking these offensive tackles and just really wearing these guys down with his energy. And he was getting through with, relative regularity, which really impressed me considering he was outweighed. And he carried that same effort and sense of urgency and his pass rush approach to training camp, and really just impressed the coaching staff with his tools that he has and that relentless motor. And those type of things are going to get you noticed when you don't have a game to play. If you show up every day and you're pretty much wreaking havoc against whoever you're going against and proving to be a quick study, that's going to catch the coaching staff's attention. And that's why he's there.
What do you know about Jason Huntley, the new running back from New Mexico State? He was a 5th-round pick. I know the Eagles liked him. They talked about that yesterday. Dave Fitt mentioned him today about how excited they are to get him possibly in the return game. This is a guy, 4.37 speed. I think he was the second fastest guy at the Combine.
Well, he wasn't invited to the Combine, but I believe he would have been the fastest running back at the NFL Combine. He's a little bit undersized.
But that was his pro day time.
Right, his pro day time. And he was a player that I consider to be a draft sleeper of mine from New Mexico State. I didn't think he would be drafted. It was surprising to see him taken in the 5th round, but he does have this incredible speed, this burst, this kick return ability. The Lions just weren't able to keep him because they simply have about 5 running backs on the roster right now. And I think that the Eagles were fortunate to get him. I know he was on their radar going into the draft, but I could see him being their opening day kick returner. He provides value in that area. He had over 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving as a senior last season. So he does have that versatility to his game. And he's surprisingly tough after, when he gets in space. He doesn't go down very easily when guys try to bring him down.
Yeah, that's an interesting pickup at the running back spot. And then, as you mentioned, Casey Toohill was another draft choice of theirs that ended up making the team. And I guess the next thing to kind of keep an eye on is Rieger, when he'll be ready to go. Alshon Jeffery, he was put on the active roster. He was not put on the PUP list. So they think he'll be ready to go, obviously before week 7, so they didn't put him on the PUP list. But the Eagles' wide receiving unit could have a completely different look in week number 2 or 3.
Yeah, Adam Kaplan on Inside the Birds was one of the first, was probably the first to say that he didn't believe that Alshon was going to go on the PUP and that he could be ready in the first, the early stages of the season. And that proved to be true here. And I kind of had the sense also that they were going to keep him on the 53. That's very telling. I do think that he's going to come back sooner than many anticipated. And I also believe that Jalen Reagor, I believe I saw something earlier this afternoon that, week 2 is looking pretty good for Reagor. And I think that kind of aligns with them not adding a veteran receiver and keeping a guy like Deontay Burnett on the practice squad in the event that they need him. But an IR in Quez Watkins, who I still haven't heard what his injury was, but I think that definitely bodes well. It's going to look, the receiving core is going to look completely revamped by the time they get to week 2. They just have to get through week 1 with a somewhat of an inexperienced group there.
All right, we'd have the game on Sunday right here on 97.3 ESPN. Andrew will be back on Friday to preview it all and give you his thoughts on the week 1 matchup between Philadelphia and Washington. It's Football at 4 here, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, tomorrow, Jeff Mosher's here, Adam Kaplan on Thursday. Andrew's back on Friday, and he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Before Thursday night, we got Chiefs and Houston. Any thoughts there?
Well, I'm going with the Chiefs. Their offense is just a complete juggernaut. I really like what they've done by adding Clyde Edwards-Helaire there. I think he's going to be add another layer to an already explosive offense. The Texans have never been able to really put it all together. I am a big Deshaun Watson fan. But I just think that, even with the moves that the Texans have made on defense, I don't know if they're going to be it's formidable enough to stop that electric Kansas City offense. It should be a good game, though.
Did you happen to see any college football over the weekend? I'm not going to lie to you. The atmosphere turned me off a bit. Now, I know that some fans are going to be able to be in some of these stadiums, so it's going to be different. But some of the college football actually turned me off. I was surprised.
Yeah, I saw the game last night, and I did see the Memphis game. It definitely turned me off a little bit, but I'm a football junkie, so I'm going to watch it no matter what.
Oh, yeah, I'll still be watching.
It was very odd. I agree with you to kind of see, almost playing in silence. It was definitely something that we're going to have to get used to.
Yeah, we sure are going to have to get used to it. But of the other sports, I think I just read something that NFL Films is going to be producing the sound inside the stadium. So they're going to have noise in there at all times. So when you're listening on television, it'll sound like people are there. It's just, that energy just not going to be the same. But hence is 2020. But thankfully, we have football Thursday night right here on 97.3 ESPN, and then on Sunday with the Eagles and Washington. Thanks, Andrew.
You got it, guys. Take care.
He, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And Football at 4, it is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and it's brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now to match your first deposit up to $250. Go to PlaySugarHouse.com. Win real money with their sports book, along with casino games from the comfort of your home. Must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.